serious. Sorry, something jumped on my screen. So COVID serious and responsive behaviors, lessons learned from the first wave of education series. This is our second session out of 4. And this series is a collaboration between the Behavior Supports for Seniors program at the Toronto Central LIN, the Center for Learning, Research and Innovation at Baycrest, CLRI in short, the Psychogeriatric Resource Consultants program of RGP of Toronto, and the Alzheimer Society of Toronto. So a few things that you need to know. First of all, we would ask that that while you're listening to the session, you'll mute yourselves unless you're speaking. When you wish to speak, you could unmute yourself, or you could just use the raise your hand button to get our attention, or post your question or comment on the chat. We will also leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for any questions or comments. I want you to also know that we will be recording this session, and the recording will be available after the session on our BSO website and also on the CLRI website. And we will post those, we will send those links to registrants, but we will also post them on the chat during this session. We also have people from across the province joining us today. Some are joining us by Zoom, but some are joining us through a private live stream on YouTube. And I wanted to tell the people on YouTube that if you would like to ask any questions, you need to make sure that you're logged into your Google account. That will allow you to utilize the YouTube chat, and our moderator will copy those questions or comments to the Zoom chat so we can respond to them. Also take under account that there is a bit of a 30-second lag between our timeline here and when you're going to see it on your YouTube. So if we're not responding to you immediately, know that's the time lag. At the end of the session, also our moderator will be posting some poll questions. We really rely on your feedback to make those sessions engaging and useful. So we would appreciate if you took the time at the end of the session to respond to this poll. We'll also be sending a survey after the session. So as I said, this is our second session out of 4 sessions for this series. This session is going to focus on forging meaningful connections in the time of COVID. And we'll talk about supportive communication and resources for activities and engagement in the face of COVID restrictions. Our speakers for today are Julie Wong. Julie is the Education and Regional Support Lead at the Alzheimer Society of Toronto. Her role consists of ensuring that the services offered by the Society are accessible across the city. She also oversees the public education coordinators who deliver education sessions to increase public awareness on Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias, and provides dementia care training to healthcare professionals. Simone Cumberbatch has spent the last 9 years of her career engrossed in the work of geriatric and behavior support. She started this work at the Central West LIN, carrying a specialist geriatric crisis caseload, facilitating difficult transitions to long-term care homes. She then moved to UHN Toronto Western Hospital in the role of behavioral support specialist, working as a consultant, providing support to the long-term care homes and inpatient units with the Toronto Central LIN. And finally, in her newest role, she carries on her passion working as a clinician leader on the community behavior support outreach team out of Baycrest. And I would say that I have the pleasure of working with both very closely. So without further ado, I would like to give the stage to Julie and Simone to carry on your presentation.
Thank you so much, Ina, for that warm welcome. And I'm just going to wait for Simone to pull up the slides for me. Right now, I'd also want to thank everyone for taking some time out of your busy days to be here. And as well, I also wanted to thank BSO for making this education available. So just a few disclosures before we officially begin. Both Simone and I, we do not have any we don't receive any financial support, and we don't have relationships with commercial interests. Okay, and all the research that we have provided here, or the information that we are providing today, has been based in research. Perfect. So in terms of what you can expect for today's topic, we will be touching on isolation and loneliness in seniors. And this is something that Mario and Dr. Ayaboni already started with last week, and we'll be discussing that as well. We'll be focusing on communication in dementia, particularly around some strategies with use of PPE. And Simone will then focus on social engagement in seniors, and we will be bringing all of this together through a case study.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to come out and hear our presentation, and we're hoping you're going to enjoy this part of the session of the series. So we're going to start by kind of talking about loneliness and isolation, and I guess why we should care about it. We as healthcare providers can often overlook loneliness in our clients and residents as a subjective emotion, something we can't control, as being less important than their physical and medical health. But the truth is that feelings of loneliness can have really serious health consequences. This is why social isolation has recently emerged as a social determinant of health and is highlighted as a serious public health concern. Persons suffering from loneliness can experience an increased risk of depression, alcoholism, suicidal thoughts, aggressive behaviors, anxiety, and impulsivity. In fact, studies suggest that social isolation impacts the body to the equivalent of other serious health risks, such as high blood pressure, physical inactivity, obesity, or smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. In seniors, these risks are even more pronounced. They have been associated with cardiovascular, autoimmune, and neurocognitive problems, as well as serious mental health issues and an increased rate of mortality. More and more research illuminates for us how especially at risk our seniors are to the ill effects of loneliness. Loneliness has been directly linked to severe depression, and the presence of depression doubles your risk for developing dementia. And if you already have dementia, it increases those symptoms, resulting in declines in your cognition, in your function and communication, and all of this can start within mere weeks of being left alone. A poll completed by the University of Michigan for this year demonstrates that the amount of seniors who report to being isolated have doubled since 2017. It's pretty easy to make the link between COVID and the increased incidence of senior isolation. As seniors are the most at risk for complicated, severe, or fatal cases of COVID, the need for them to isolate during the pandemic is higher than in any other population. This increase is noted across all sectors, but maybe mostly in the hard-hit long-term care homes, which as a result have had to really change the way they provide care and service. Group activities have been canceled, communal dining has stopped, and many clients have to isolate in their room for days on end. And to control the spread from outside sources, we have to limit our visitors, and this includes family and caregivers as well. This results in seniors being more isolated than they ever were before. It's important that we stop here to remember that research had already told us that loneliness is reported to the double amount in long-term care homes as it is in the community dwelling population. So because of this, especially for our clients who have cognitive impairment, there's a lot of confusion and pain associated with why are my family no longer visiting me? Why can't I go outside? Why can't I spend time with friends? And all this can lead to feelings of abandonment, depression, and an overall increase in behavioral output. If we keep in mind that prior to the spread of COVID, we already knew about these high levels of isolation, we can only imagine the level of social and emotional isolation that our seniors in long-term care are currently facing. A 2020 Australian study called Loneliness and Isolation in Long-Term Care and the COVID Pandemic, which is pretty timely, puts forward that preventing loneliness and attempting to maintain quality of life for residents who are in institutions is as important as providing them with personal care. It's important that we mention here that the effects of loneliness and isolation have the same weight, whether it's actual, since as living alone, or actually being abandoned by your loved ones to your own devices, or perceived, such as being surrounded by staff, but feeling disconnected from everybody around you. Both emotional, perceived, or actual isolation has the same weight in your health. The importance of connection with people and the world around you really can't be overstated. One of the most important ways to create connection with somebody is effective communication.
So when we think about communication, it's what we use to build and maintain relationships with other people, whether it's a personal capacity or a professional capacity. It's what allows us to express our thoughts, our feelings, our needs and wants, and also helps us to understand the same of others. And I really love this quote by Tony Robbins: "To effectively communicate, we must realize that we are all different in the way we perceive the world and use this understanding as a guide to our communication with others." And when we're thinking about dementia just further changes how a person perceives the world around them and how they interact with the people and things around. Slide. So we know that dementia affects the brain and that isolation can actually lead to a worsening of dementia symptoms. So some of the things that we might expect to see include having difficulty with understanding whole or parts of the conversation. You may have a person who has trouble finding the right words or speaking in a word salad. They may also repeat words or phrases and have challenges with reading and understanding the written word. Some other changes that we might expect to see in someone with dementia around communication is less awareness of how to respond in a social situation. Especially in a multicultural city such as Toronto, where people often speak more than one language, you may find that someone is reverting to speaking their first language. You may also find that their speech becomes more and more vague over the time. Rather than calling objects by their name, they might be describing the object instead. And as the disease progresses, we can also see an increased reliance on nonverbal cues over the disease journey. And finally, in terms of communication, whether it's understanding or our expression, when communication isn't occurring the way the person would like to, we can also see increased frustration. Next slide. And the next slide after that. So when we're thinking about this current situation of the pandemic and the need for PPE, there's actually additional challenges that come in terms of communication. So I'd just like to take a moment for you to use a chat window where I'm not as savvy as maybe our previous speaker, but this is a great place for us to interact. Have you ever wondered what people with dementia are thinking when they see someone in PPE? And you can type down some of your impressions as this is occurring. Okay. So we see alien coming to take me to surgery, a ghost. We see some fear, a sense of danger, awkward. Whether we were at war or robbery. So you can see there's a lot of different things that are occurring here. And these were actually some of the things that I also thought up when I was looking at pictures of people in PPE. It may also trigger someone with previous traumas. And actually, the other thing that I often thought of when I thought of this is Hollywood movies, hazmat suits, toxic fumes, just a lot of fear and anxiety. So thinking about all of these impressions, a person with dementia may interpret the situation differently or have trouble with understanding the gravity of the current situation. It can be extremely confusing and distressing. On top of that, people with dementia may be experiencing agnosia or trouble with recognition. In full PPE, the person living with dementia may not recognize a worker, even if they are familiar. The mask obscures a significant portion of our face, and without the visual cues that are provided by the lips, as well as our overall facial expressions, this can actually affect a person's ability to understand what it is that we're trying to convey. Masks also change the clarity of our conversation. Our voices become quieter, the sound can become muffled, and our pronunciation becomes less clear. And if the person that you're caring for has hearing impairments, that just creates an additional challenge to communication. Next slide. So in order for us to communicate effectively with a person with dementia, we need to have these 5 components in place. But of course, for the purposes of this particular presentation, we'll be focusing on that creativity in our expression while using PPE. Next slide. So even if dementia has changed the person's ability to communicate, there's still a great opportunity for us to use other techniques to exchange and connect. Our communication can become more successful if we start by putting aside how we are feeling, remembering that we're communicating a whole lot, even if we're not saying anything, and that the person with dementia is highly sensitive to all of our nonverbal communication, and will use that as cues to guide how they should be responding. We also want to think about what we know about that person, their likes, their preferences, their abilities, their capacities, so that we are able to compensate for their losses. We also want to make sure that the environment that we're preparing is suitable by striving for one-to-one conversations and avoiding distractions and background noise. We also want to make sure that any disabilities that might affect communication are attended to and addressed. We want to project a positive, calm attitude. And lastly, we want to think about how we normally communicate and areas that we might need to make some adjustments. And we'll explore just what kind of adjustments we might want to consider in this time. Next slide. With a thoughtful approach to communication, it's actually possible to have positive interactions with a person with dementia. These are actually techniques that you already have in your communication toolbox, and they still hold true with using PPE. It looks like Simone just cut off for a moment. While this is happening, I'll just keep on going. A few things within your communication toolbox that I did want to highlight is we want to make sure that we fully mirror the other person's tone and emotion, that we try to use words that are familiar to the person, but also the importance of touch. During COVID, we might be more hesitant to engage in touch for infection control purposes, but we do want to remember the value in offering therapeutic touch. Let's talk about some of the other ways that we can make some adjustments. Are you okay, Simone, in terms of the slides?
Yeah, sorry, I dipped out for a bit there, everyone. We're back.
You can go over to the next slide.
Sure.
Thanks. So consider body positioning. As you mentioned, there's a lot of fear or also foreign associations with wearing PPE. We want to make sure that we approach this person slowly from the front to give them time to process who you are and what you want. Bending down at the knee level, so that you can see eye to eye, will also allow the person with dementia to feel comfortable and in control. We also want to think about how we modify our speech and speak with the listener's needs in mind. So we want to speak slower and at a much more deliberate pace than we would without a PPE. We want to enunciate. We want to open our mouth wider to speak and to engage all of our mouth muscles to shape and sharpen each sound. We want to make sure that we're using our whole voice so that we can carry the same level of intensity from the beginning of your sentence to the end of your sentence. So we want to make sure we engage enough of our breath to do so. We want to pause frequently and speak with shorter sentences. And we want to make sure that we increase our expressiveness in our voice. What exactly does that mean? Let's take a closer look. There are 7 statements here, each with all the same words, but depending on where you put the emphasis, the whole phrase takes on a very different meaning. And when you add in punctuation like a question mark or an exclamation mark, the phrase again can change in meaning. So aside from thinking about where you place your word emphasis, you can also increase your expressiveness by modulating your volume, your pitch, your rhythm, and the emotional quality of how you're carrying through your message. Okay, next slide. We can also be much more expressive and exaggerated with what's above our mask. Good eye contact is important. Of course, we do need to consider gender and cultural differences. One suggestion is to look long enough at the person to see their eye color, look away, and then look back again to ease any discomfort from constant eye contact. We want to make sure we let our eyebrows tell the story. So this is a great moment for us to interact again. Looking at picture number 1, what kind of emotion do you think this person is trying to convey? So we see blah. Any other emotions that come to mind? I'm bored, I'm uninterested, a little bit of a skeptic, neutral, tired, annoyed. So a whole variation of judgment or expressions. So when our upper eyelids are slightly relaxed and drooped, it might send the message, just as you mentioned, sadness, fatigue, boredom, or I'm just about to check out. Now take a look at number 3. What kind of emotion do you think this person is trying to convey? Really, confusion, anger, stern, mad, shock. Again, a variation. And so if our lower eyelids are tense and we also see a narrowing of the eyes, it can send a few different messages. It could mean that something has your attention. It could mean that you're focused on something, or it could be the beginning of anger. Okay. So why it's important to be mindful of this is we have our normal resting face. Are we aware of what our normal face is conveying in terms of emotion? And is this what we want to convey? Of course, using just our eyes and brows alone in the absence of any other strategy can be difficult to interpret. As you can see, the same expression was interpreted differently by all of you. So it's really about making sure everything that we are saying, whether it's through words or our body, are sending exactly the same message. Next slide. Even as a person loses their ability to communicate verbally, they're still able to communicate. And remember that nonverbal communication is an important part of your communication toolbox, and that particularly during this time, we need to be so much more intentional of our nonverbal communication. Gestures and movements are an area that we can consider modifying. Since body language is natural unconscious language that really tells you what you really think and feel, if there isn't ever a conflict in messaging, the person listening is likely going to choose the nonverbal messaging as a true message. It's important that we underline our words with gestures and that we use larger movements and incorporate more of our muscles. I'll give you an example. You could say, I don't know, with just the palms heading up. Or you could make a full use of your shoulders, your arms, and your voice and tone and say, I don't know. And that can communicate a longer way than just simply the hands held up in the air. With gestures, we want to consider using commonly understood gestures, but also be mindful that there may still be cultural differences. Because face masks do obscure portions of the face, and that can affect our ability to understand one another, there has been some creativity and people have been looking at other options for use of PPE. For the ones that you see here, there are pros and cons for how these masks might be helpful, but at the end of the day, we need to consider several things. Whether it stands up in terms of our infection control, whether they're effective in preventing the spread of disease, how safe these types of PPE are for the wearer, how practical they are for the work setting that you're in. And of course, at the end of the day, we also want to consider how might the person with dementia respond to someone in these types of masks compared to traditional PPE. So I'll just focus on that first picture. While it might be nice to see a face in its entirety, you can see the proportions of the face are a little off and it can be quite unnerving. The other thing that we're thinking about this is the importance of mirroring the person's emotion and tone. And so if you're trying to validate someone with feelings of anger and sadness, but all they see is the happy face with the giant smile and the words, I'm so sorry, it can send a disconnect. And again, it can make the listener doubt your genuineness and authenticity. Okay, next picture. Written aids are also a great way of facilitating clear conversations while in PPE. It can be something like a whiteboard or something as simple as a sheet of paper tucked inside a page protector, a dry erase marker, and something to wipe clean with. And this is actually an idea that I stole from my daughter's school because they've been using this. So we actually use this as a means to communicate and draw and write messages. Communication boards can be pre-made, or it can be personalized and embody text, pictures, or a combination of both. If you are going to be using a pre-made communication board, some things we want to make sure is for the print, whether we're using print, something that's easy to read, or cursive, whether we have things that will provide clear decision making, like a yes or no, where the person can circle or check mark or indicate what they want. If they're using things like pictures, we want to consider color. Is a black and white apple more effective or a red apple effective? What about the size? Is it visible for the person who's using it? And how easy are the icons to recognize? Is it something that's more abstract, or it's very clear what we're looking at? Now that we have an understanding of how important good communication skills are to maintaining and forging connections and ways that we can facilitate that connection in PPE, I wanted to pass it to Simone to talk about connecting through social engagement.
Thanks, guys. So at the start of our presentation, we discussed this year's impact of loneliness and social isolation and how that can impact our seniors. We've been able to go through some great techniques from Julie around how we can forge connection through communication. And now we're going to talk about creating that connection on a larger scale regarding social engagement. The good news is that meaningful social engagement can have the opposite effect of loneliness. Mental activity and frequent participation in some manner of social activity has been shown to prevent cognitive decline and even delay the onset of Alzheimer's. And there's evidence that shows us that persons with dementia who have lost skills in isolation can regain them with continued purposeful therapeutic engagement and interactions. Although we acknowledge that in-person interactions are preferable, this option isn't always open to us during COVID. But luckily, early research is already starting to show that online social engagement has positive effects for people living with dementia. We are seeing more growth and opportunities and services that are specific to senior engagement all the time pop up over the virtual mediums. Now, not every client is going to be able to adjust to a virtual support, and we know this, but I think if anything, COVID has shown us that there's more opportunities in this arena than we first thought. So, this is why Baycrest, BSO, and CLRI have created the Therapeutic and Creative Engagement Guide for Seniors. But since that is a lot to say, we'll just say the TCE Guide. We'll spend a few minutes reviewing this tool, and then we're going to move on to how we can combine the communication techniques that we've just learned about and the TCE into a real-world scenario. Now, the purpose of the TCE Guide was to help address isolation, loneliness, and understimulation within the long-term care homes. However, it has applicability across all the sectors: community, hospital, rehab. The only significant limiting factor to its use is reliable internet service. Now, I was going to say that most of us have that, but I think my dipping out shows that that's not always the case. Still, once we've got a good streaming device and we've got relatively reliable internet service, we're able to access the virtual offerings outlined within the guide. We acknowledge that another factor that we did keep in mind was that staffing ratios within the various sections and institutions will have an impact on someone's ability to help their clients engage in social and therapeutic activities. However, the idea of this guide is to provide easy, available access to senior-specific, dementia-friendly, free-to-use virtual supports that are available to us all across this pandemic. What we've really done here is take out all the exploration work for you and put it in an easy to use list so that it's easier for both you and your client to find something that fits their needs. So this is a snapshot from one of the first pages of the guide. The guide was created with long-term care in mind, as I said, and it's meant to act as an aid for those who are working in long-term care so diligently to support our elderly population. This can include nurses, social work, OT, PT, rec therapy, PRCs, and BSO leads, as well as the many clinicians on the amazing BSO regulated teams. However, anyone working in healthcare who is working alongside of a senior or someone with dementia can pick this up and gain from it. The first few pages provide a welcome, an explanation of the purpose, and instructions around how to make the best use of this tool. It includes prompts, cues, and questions to ensure that the user has a good and thorough understanding of their client's history, likes, dislikes, strengths, and challenges. It even provides a few options about how you can go around gathering this information, including highlighting and providing direct links to excellent tools such as the Alzheimer Society All About Me booklet, as you can see here from the screenshot. Answering all the questions that we have outlined in this section isn't necessary, but it is best before you use the tool to have a pretty in-depth understanding of your client, their environment, their capabilities, and the way in which care is provided in that institution. This can be from past experience, from family providing that information, or for using any of the tools we've highlighted in the TCE. So the TCE also includes our own easy-to-use icons. This is supposed to help navigate the online opportunities presented in the guide. Each icon is related to a level of capability and identifies which offering may be best suited to the person with that capability. This includes low cognition friendly, low active movement friendly, sight loss friendly, and more. When you see one of these icons next to a service, at a glance, you get a better idea if that service will meet your client's needs. The guide is divided into 10 basic sections. That's art, dance, mixed creative arts, music, drama, mindfulness and yoga, reading and digital stories, creative writing, religion and spirituality, and finally, sightseeing and virtual travel. The icons that you see here are actual snapshots taken from the guide itself. You'll find them to the right top corner of the guide, and again, it's a navigational tool to help you get to the section you want faster. So what do these actual sections look like? Let's take a look. So I know this is a bit busy and the words are very small, but don't worry about trying to read it. It's only a visual meant to give you an idea of what the layout of the guide looks like. This is our introduction page for each of the sections. It follows the same pattern for every category. To the top right, again, you'll see the navigation aid that we discussed before. So this one is for a section taken from religion. Following that, we present some research around why this specific type of engagement is vital and useful in dementia care. And then we provide the links so you can check out the articles and research for yourself. Following that, we highlight the technology and devices needed to best access the services listed. Then we put in the populations which most stand to benefit from this service. You'll see our icons here. And after that, there's usually a cue or two concerning COVID precautions. This particular cue is related to the rate of spread when it comes to singing in groups indoors. So in the case of religion, that might be with hymns or religious songs. And finally, at the end of the page, there's a section which provides some tips for the enhancement of the engagement for your client or the group. This is there to help you create your care plan. The page or two afterwards provides a summary of the free online services related to that particular section, in this case, religion and spirituality. So you can see here, we provide the name of the service, the summary of the service, highlighting the most important parts of what's offered, and then a hyperlink or a contact to help you access the service directly. If the service also includes important printouts or activity sheets, we provide direct links to those as well, just to make it that much easier for you. So all of our sections, they follow this basic outline except for one. And that is our section on virtual tours. We followed a bit of a different pattern in the layout for the list of services for this one because we were able to find so many useful offerings to share that we had to make the summaries a lot shorter to accommodate them. In some cases, it's just a line. Still, this is one of my favorite sections because it's a great way to help our clients who are stuck in their beds or armchairs, living rooms, or on a unit take a trip around the world. From gardens to zoos, under the sea, busy metropolitan cities, all without having to get up or leave their space or wear a mask. These can be made personal in a care plan, such as traveling to their hometown and getting to do a virtual tour of that, or it can be universal, such as watching the hypnotic movements of jellyfish on the live cam of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is one of my favorites. Who doesn't love jellyfish? These virtual tours can run the gamut from being really calming to exciting and a mixture of both. And that brings us to one of my favorites. Now you're gonna have to bear with me here because, oh my God, it worked, guys, it worked. So I've shared my sound. I'm gonna look for thumbs up so if you guys can hear this. This is one of my favorites. The National Geographic, in collaboration with Google World, have created a high definition exploration of some of the most remote, vibrant, and beautiful places on our globe. I've especially enjoyed the bright and fiery tour of the volcanoes of Hawaii, which may be a little too exciting for some of our clients, but there's also the Bryce Canyon, swimming underwater in the reef, or traveling to the far reaches of the north. let's see if we can get a glimpse of it. So I really enjoy that every time I watch it, which is a lot. But even the music is quite soothing. It's guided tours by the rangers themselves, but some of the gardens are just walking through the really elaborate British gardens and English countryside. There's something there for everybody, I think. Oh, here's the issue now. It doesn't want to leave, which I understand. There we go. So the last section in the guide I'd like to bring your attention to is the activities at a glance, which can be found at the back. You can think of this as a super informative appendix. The full TCE guide has 41 pages in all, which is a good thing because that means there's lots of offerings and service, but we do recognize that staff don't always have the time to review such a large document to get what they need out of it. With this in mind, we created a section at the back which lists all the services under their appropriate headings, along with mini summaries and hyperlinks that take you directly to where you want to go. Once you have a good understanding of your client, their capabilities, and the environment, the activities at a glance section is a quick and easy way where the services can be found in the TCE. Overall, the TCE guide was designed with your support in mind, and it's supposed to be a help to you and your team. It's in order to you to really get your clients back with a focus of quality of life and social and creative engagement opportunities. I did also want to add that when this document, it is a live document, so we will be updating it because a lot of the services that we've included, they have been created because of COVID. That means that as time goes on, they might change, right? So we're going to include an email where people using it can get back to us to let us know if a link is down or if a service have changed or if it's now for pay, and then we'll adjust the guide as necessary. So it will have an online place where it lives, but we'll also make it so that you can download and print it out. The only downside to printing it out is that you won't be able to just click and go where you want to go. So now that we're familiar with COVID-informed dementia-specific communication skills and the TCE guide, let's take all that together to see how we can apply it to a real-world scenario.
Thanks so much, Simone. So I do want to premise that this Mr. Marino is a hypothetical character that Simone and I created, just in case for confidentiality purposes. So Mr. Marino is a 69-year-old gentleman. He's community dwelling and of Italian descent. He lives in a private home with a spouse, and he has 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, who live out of town, but do remain active in his life and is in his care, and also visit regularly. He's a very active and outgoing man, and he loves to tell stories. So 4 years ago, he retired from his work as a skilled mason. And since retirement, he's been sure to keep himself busy. And he does have a good group of friends that he likes to spend time with. Now, over the last year or so, he started to demonstrate some age-related changes. He's had to wear glasses, and he now has a hearing aid in his right ear. His family has also started to notice that he's speaking more in Italian than in English. He's also showing some signs of cognitive and personality changes. So some examples of that is short-term memory loss. There are moments of confusion. There are instances of him being quite short-tempered and withdrawing from socially. And these are things that are out of character for Mr. Marino. Furthermore, his wife has also begun to feel a little bit unsure about leaving him alone or unsupervised. He is being followed by a family doctor who believes that Mr. Marino is showing signs of mild cognitive impairment. Next slide. Okay. So pre-COVID, Mr. Marino was doing quite well. he had his wife to provide that daily support as well as interaction. And to address some of his recent changes, as well as the need for supervision, his children have been pooling together to provide funding for a privately paid personal support worker 3 times a week to do things like light house cleaning, companionship for dad, and giving respite opportunities for mom. On top of this, he attends a half-day active men's group on Wednesdays, an exercise and bocce ball group on Sundays, and just about every morning after breakfast, he walks to the cafe down the street for a coffee and an opportunity to chit-chat with the regulars. However, due to COVID, there have been some pretty big changes in his life. When the virus first hit, the family decided to cancel the personal support worker service because they were worried about cross-contamination and risk of infection. The service has been canceled about 3 months, and since then, the wife has started to experience significant caregiver burnout as well as mental strain. So the family has decided to request a new PSW from the same agency. His social supports have also taken a large hit. The family has not been able to visit him at all. His cultural and social groups have also been closed, and the cafe that he spends his mornings at every day has closed down for COVID for a few months, before reopening with some very strict COVID rules in place, including not allowing their patrons to remain within the cafe to chat and socialize. So just thinking about who he is as a person and some of the changes that have been occurring, what effect do you think these changes might have had on Mr. Marino? And you can feel free to use that chat box to type in some of your responses. Okay. We have sense of loss, some confusion, change in the routine, loneliness, boredom, isolation, depression, anxiety. Right, the escalation or worsening of his mild cognitive impairment, frustration, aimlessness. Those are some really great ideas.
Yeah, you guys are right on the money. So as you guys are correctly guessing, there has been a really big change to his presentation because of all the things that you were correctly saying he's experiencing. Because of the loss of his meaningful social engagement and activities, these big changes to his routine, we're seeing the emergence of responsive behaviors. He's restless and bored within the home, going from room to room looking for something to do. He's trying to leave the house at least once a day, saying that he feels trapped inside and wants to go to his cafe for his morning coffee. There's been occasions where he has gone out on his own, only to be turned away because he forgot his mask, and then he becomes lost in the community trying to find another cafe to go to. Not that that would work because he still doesn't have a mask. After this has happened a few times, his wife is now pretty hesitant to let him go outside by himself at all. And then, of course, when she tries to stop him or tell him that he has to stay home, he gets upset because he feels even more controlled and trapped. He's had further declines in communication, even to his Italian, which was pretty strong before. He's also starting to have the first occurrences of sleep disruption, waking overnight and taking long naps during the day, which is new for him, but he reports there's nothing for him to do anyway. There's been increased apathy, along with a loss of interest in the activities that he used to do with his spouse, such as basic gardening and cooking together. Even his historically strong appetite has started to decrease. And lastly, there's been more arguments with his spouse, who finds him increasingly irritable and argumentative, including a few escalated events in which he showed some verbal behaviors, raising his voice, shouting, using profanity, and this was really outside of his baseline. His wife says that she just doesn't know how to talk to him anymore. So, in order to assess what's going on, we decided to use the PIECES framework. In this way, we highlighted a few of the important elements of Mr. Marino's presentation: his increased aphasia, his social and cognitive losses, and the potential for possible depression setting in. And as we spoke about before, that depression would only accelerate his dementia or his dementia symptoms. Looking at the PIECES outline that we have here quickly, is there anything else that you'd want to add to that PIECES assessment? And again, once again, feel free to do that in the chat. It's okay, there's nothing to add. It's a pretty thorough pieces. Okay, so then we decided to look at the pieces framework through the lens of meaningful connection. Let's do that here. Okay, so first we highlighted those factors that we thought would most likely be impacted or impacting poor communication. You can see them highlighted here in blue. Obviously aphasia, the increased irritability, more argumentative. All of this is around how you're going to approach someone and how you're going to speak to them. Then we did the same for the factors that we thought might be related to loss of meaningful and social engagement. You can see them here highlighted in red: possible depression, understimulation, loss of engagement, loneliness. When we put them together, we overlay them on top, and where we have our overlap is in purple. You can see that not only is there a lot of overlap, but that all 6 sections of the pieces are in some way affected by this loss of social engagement and poor communication. This shows us that that loss of connectivity brought on by the isolation and miscommunication can affect Mr. Marino in every element of his being. And this is really important for us when we think about our own clients. This is why when we say that loneliness, boredom, and understimulation, it can go on to impact every element of that client and how they're interacting. So now imagine that you are in the picture. Knowing what we know now about Mr. Marino, imagine yourself in this role. Whether you're a doctor, nurse, social worker, personal support worker, clinician, or otherwise, you're going in to see Mr. Marino in his home and you want to address these changes in behavior. This is your first visit. So what are some of the strategies that you want to keep in mind for that first visit? We're looking at the chat if you have any, by the way. Oh, Mario, always with a great suggestion. Validating his experience and trying to understand it all from his perspective. We also have setting up the environment for optimal communication, turning off the TV, the radio, sitting close, or using a pocket talker if we have to. We're also going to, oh, it's coming in thick and fast now. We're going to use the social history to gain rapport, maybe a whiteboard for communication or a visual communication card, learning about his life story to try to connect with him on things that are meaningful to him. Really, you guys can get this presentation. You're so good. Bring him a coffee. This is a good one. I really like that one. Toss in some Italian words and phrases. You guys are on the ball. So let's see what we came up with.
So you've mentioned a lot of things that we would also suggest, and we put together a sample communication plan. And since we do know some things, but not everything, this is actually meant to be more of a living document that changes and grows as we learn about him. So one thing we do know is that he has the hearing aid and it's only in one ear. So if we are approaching him, we want to be mindful that we're on the other side. So his left ear, which is good. And we can enlist his wife's support in that. We also found out that he prefers to be called Teo, so making use of that frequently to draw his attention when we do want to communicate with him. I really love Mario's suggestion of that validation. So he's never seen someone in PPE before, so can you imagine first visit, someone is in PPE. So some things we might also want to do is have a picture, a large picture of ourselves on the front of our uniform, just so he can picture who you are outside of that PPE. Something that we also identified as an important piece was to be able to support the family with positive interaction strategies. Because we didn't really have a true sense of his communication abilities, we decided to use a blank communication board just to find out where his skills are, how he communicates, and how he articulates himself. And a great way that we can do that is pay attention to certain words he's using. Perhaps they carry a different meaning than what we actually think. We may also want to consider, even though he is speaking more in Italian, he may still have the ability to understand English. So we want to be able to gauge whether it's both receptive and expressive. but also his ability to follow multi-step instructions. So it's really more of an exploration and being observant of what we're doing, but also keeping in mind all of those strategies that we talked about in terms of engaging him. Okay, next slide. So in terms of communication and helping the family, in addition to the tips that we shared with you that would also pertain to virtual communication, these were just some additional tips that we had to share with the family to make the most. So one of the things that they could do is to set up a regular schedule. And this can be something that the family as a whole looks forward to and puts dedicated time aside. And that's also great in terms of creating a routine for Mr. Marino. So he has something to look forward a certain time each week or several times a week. We also want to be mindful about our appearance. So if the person has always appeared a particular way to Mr. Marino, we want to make sure. So if say any of the children have never worn glasses in front of their father, then perhaps starting a virtual call with glasses can also affect his ability to recognize. So we may not want to wear the glasses. We also want to minimize potential distractions, whether it's something that's happening on your end or on the other end. So I have a toddler in the other room next to me, so making sure that that sound doesn't come through as much. So in the case of Mr. Marino, he actually has 2 grandchildren who really love to engage with him, but they're boys and they're very, very loud and exuberant. So at the beginning of the call, the children will spend some time with their grandfather, but then the partner takes them away and the daughter can then focus on that meaningful engagement. And then we want to think about things like lighting. So if you're sitting in a position where you're in front of a window, that can create some backlight, and it might be difficult for someone to see your face or see your expressions. So if you see that first picture, imagine having a conversation with that person and what that might be like. You might also want to be mindful if you're sitting behind a window. So depending on, again, how much light is coming through, that can create glare for the other person. Certainly most web cameras will do some self-adjustments depending on where you are. So you might want to play around a little bit and trial it out before you actually have a conversation. So I know in certain places in my home, I won't have, for some reason, the lighting doesn't pick up well and I look very distorted. We also want to think about where we position the device relative to you. So whether that's using a cell phone, a smartphone, whether that's using a tablet or a laptop. We want to make sure that we are sitting in a place where our upper body is showing as well as a part of our head so that we can actually use gestures as well to support our communication. So if you have the camera too low, then the person with dementia is looking down at you. And if you have the camera too high, then the person with dementia is looking down at you. Or if you have the camera too low, then the person ends up seeing the bottom portion of your face and your facial angles can be distorted. And it may also look like you're looking down on that person and that can trigger some responses. We also want to be present. Perhaps sometimes if you are engaging in a conversation, you might be doing other things as well. You might be checking emails, perhaps playing a game. So we want to be mindful of that as well. And if you're not looking at the camera, it can signify to someone that you're not paying attention. And that can be distressing for someone with dementia. So if you can remember, looking into the camera is equivalent to looking someone in the eyes. How nice would it be to have a conversation where this person is looking somewhere else? And then we want to be flexible. There may be some days where there's no conversation and you're just connecting in silence. There might be some days where the conversation is cut short. And there might be other days where the conversation flows freely and smoothly and lengthy. And it's important for families to remember to be smooth. And then you can engage in signs. So this is not in Italian, so I do apologize for that, but you could use something where it offers a visual cue as well as a language cue to support Mr. Marino, as we know he likes to go outside. And so by putting masks close by and engaging in this support, perhaps he can still do the things he likes to do, but do it in a safe manner.
So I know that we're running low on time right now, so we'll just speed through the last few sections. So then we would do an assessment, in which case we are looking through Mr. Marino's history, all the great stuff that you guys said. We might use the All About Me Alzheimer's booklet. Through this, we discovered that he grew up in a little Italian town. He was always outdoors, loved being outdoors, that he enjoyed visiting the larger cities in Italy with his family, and that he's had many adventures and travels as he's done lots of migrating through his life before settling in Canada. We also did do an assessment of his activity tolerance and attention span. And if you're like me, you're not a PT, or you're not sure how to go about doing this, we solved that problem by reaching out to his adult day program as he did exercises there. And we spoke with them and just figured out how long he can sit, how long he can stand, does he have any pain. Through this discussion, we discovered that he does have some knee pain that bounces up now and then from a chronic injury. So we know that if he's going to engage in exercise, that we give him a Tylenol beforehand. We discovered that if he's interested in something and engaged, we've got a good attention span of up to 35 to 40 minutes, and that he has a very good activity tolerance. So up to 40 minutes of really slow paced senior focused exercise. Because of this, we were able to set up, using the TCE, a pretty specific care plan for him. First, we linked him with walking tours of Rome, Venice, and Pisa. The new PSW takes him out every morning. They wear their mask, they get the coffee, they come home, and they look through the tour that he gets to choose. In this way, he's able to remember things that happened before. He gets really excited when he sees places that he's already been. And in this way, they get to take part in reminiscent therapy together, and it's helping his memory. Via the Access Alliance, which we also got from the TCE, he joined a weekly seniors coffee mingle and chat live Zoom event on Friday afternoons, where there's free-flowing engagement and he gets his coffee again. For exercise, he's now going via virtual to the Bethel Center twice a week. His favorite classes are the early morning energizers on Mondays, and he surprised his wife by really liking the Japanese Tai Chi before lunch on Fridays. Lastly, with his wife's encouragement, we got him linked to the Time Slips Creativity Center. This provides him with senior-specific prompts and supports him in writing his life story, which is something that he's always wanted to do. So, using both our communication and our TCE, we were able to create a really tailored and specific, socially engaged and communicative care plan for this client. And he's shown differences in his communication, the behaviors have gone down, and the depression is diminished.
So my apologies, at 2 minutes before the poll jumps on the screen. So we do have the poll up there for people to respond. And I wanted, we have about a minute left, and so I was wondering if we could pause here for any pressing questions or comments from our audience. And I wanted to take the opportunity of this pause to really thank you, Julie and Simone, for a very engaging and stimulating presentation that obviously have raised a lot of interest and great comments, which I hope you were able to follow and see on the screen by participants. A lot of people are very eager, found that the advice about communication very practical, and are very eager to use the tool. So which I know will be available very soon in the next few days, correct?
Yeah, want you to use it.
Great, so we will share the tool, we will share the slide deck. That was some of the questions that were posted. Is there any other questions beyond very, very warm comments that you could see on the chat? Are there any pressing questions or clarifications? Okay, I'm seeing none, and we are at 3 o'clock. So I really, really want to thank you again, Julie and Simone. I also want to thank Matthew and Agnes in the background that were helping us moderate this session. And really thank you to everybody who took interest in this topic and joined us today. We had really high attendance on both Zoom and YouTube, so that's great. Thank you, everyone. I will adjourn us. Have a great and wonderful day. Please join us next week for the third session to talk about how to support anxious families and caregivers in the climate or context of COVID-19. Take care, everyone.